Have you ever lost someone because of your own decision? It's a question that cuts deeper than any wound, one that doesn't fade with time. I've carried that question with me for years, buried under medals, uniforms, and silence. But the truth has a way of clawing its way back, no matter how hard you try to bury it. Tonight, I can't silence it anymore. What I'm about to tell you, I've never said out loud, not to my family, not even to myself. This isn't a story about war, it's a story about a promise, a choice, and a single moment that divided my life into before and after. We were brothers in blood, in life, in everything. He was older by 3 years, stronger, calmer, the kind of man who could find peace even in chaos. Growing up, he was the one who took the blame when I made mistakes, the one who stood between me and the world. When the war came, I told him we should stay together. I didn't want to fight, but he looked at me with that same quiet certainty and said, "If we go together." That's what brothers do, right? They hold the line for each other, they protect, they survive. But what happens when protecting becomes impossible? When every order, every decision, every breath could be the one that ends everything you love? The battlefield doesn't care about promises. It strips you bare, until all that's left is instinct and fear. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times, the smoke, the radio crackling, his voice calling out for me. And every time, I ask myself the same question. Did I choose to live, or did I choose to let him die? You felt it too, haven't you? That one decision you can't forget, the one that follows you into your sleep, whispering that maybe you could have done more. Maybe if you had been faster, braver, things would be different. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear isn't just my confession. It's a memory that refuses to die, a truth I can no longer hide. I'm not telling this for forgiveness. I'm telling it because some stories demand to be spoken, even if they break you in the process. Maybe you'll understand, maybe you won't. But before I can tell you what happened on that night, the night I lost my brother, you need to know who we were and what we promised each other before everything went wrong. Before I tell you the rest, I need you to understand something. This story isn't just mine. It's about all of us who've ever carried a memory that refuses to fade, a voice we can't silence, or a promise we couldn't keep. If you've ever felt that weight, that quiet guilt that time doesn't erase, I want to hear your story too. Leave it in the comments, even if it's just a sentence or a feeling. Sometimes writing it down is the first step to letting it go. And when you share, it's not just words, it's connection. It reminds others that they're not alone in the things they don't talk about. If what you've heard so far resonated with you, take a second to like this video. It may seem small, but it tells me that stories like this, stories about truth, memory, and humanity, still matter. Every time you interact, it helps this message reach someone else who might need to hear it right now. And if you want to keep walking through these hidden stories with me, the ones buried in letters, memories, and lost voices, make sure you're subscribed. Your presence here is what keeps this space alive, what turns a confession into something bigger, understanding. Now let me take you back to the last night I ever saw my brother, and the promise that still echoes every time I close my eyes. We were boys once, long before the war stripped away the meaning of that word. Two brothers chasing sunlight through the fields behind our father's house, fighting over who was faster, stronger, braver. He always let me win. I see that now. He was the kind of person who didn't need to prove himself. His strength was quiet, steady, the kind that made everyone around him feel safe. My brother Daniel had this way of smiling even when things fell apart. He could turn fear into calm, noise into silence. And I was the restless one, always doubting, always needing him to pull me back from the edge. When the war came, we didn't talk about it much. It was like a storm we both saw forming on the horizon, unavoidable, heavy, and real. We tried to pretend life would stay the same, that our world wouldn't split in half. But then, the letters came. 2 envelopes, 2 names, one destiny. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, our mother's hands shaking as she passed them to us. Daniel looked at me and said, "If we go together." Those words felt noble back then. Now they feel like a curse I can't undo. He packed light, always practical. A small photo of our family, a pocket Bible, and a silver chain our father used to wear. I remember him tucking it under his shirt like it was armor. "It'll bring me home," he said. I laughed, told him superstition wouldn't. "Save him." He smiled and answered, "Maybe not, but it'll remind me why I have to survive." That was Daniel, a man who found reason in chaos. The kind of person you follow without question. In the weeks before deployment, we barely slept. We'd sit outside at night, listening to the world breathe, pretending we weren't afraid. He told me that no matter what happened, we couldn't lose ourselves to the war, that we had to stay human. I didn't realize it then, but that was his way of preparing me for what was coming. Because war doesn't just take lives, it rewrites the way you see everything. It teaches you how fragile courage really is. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because our bond wasn't just about blood, it was about trust, and how trust can turn into guilt when tested by fear. Looking back, I can see all the signs, the quiet moments where he looked at me a little too long, the times he said goodbye like he already knew. Maybe he did. Maybe part of him understood that. Some promises aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to haunt you. If this story has made you think of someone you once swore you'd never lose, write one word in the comments. Brotherhood. The first day on the battlefield felt like stepping into another world, one that didn't obey the same rules of time, light, or reason. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground swallowed our boots with every step. You could taste the metal in the wind, the faint bitterness of gunpowder and fear. I remember the first explosion, not because of the sound, but because of the silence that followed it. It was like the earth itself had paused to take a breath before collapsing into chaos. Men shouted names that disappeared into the roar of machines. Somewhere in all that noise, I kept looking for Daniel. He was always just ahead of me, steady, unshaken. Even when bullets tore through the fog, his movements were calm, measured. "We go in together. We come out together," he yelled over his shoulder, his voice cutting through the madness like a thread pulling me back to reality. That promise echoed louder than the gunfire. I clung to it like it was oxygen, the only thing that reminded me we were still brothers, not soldiers, not numbers, not ghosts in waiting. War isn't what the movies show you. It's not glory or purpose. It's survival stitched together with instinct. Every sound becomes a signal, every shadow a possible death. There's a strange kind of transformation that happens. When you cross that line, the moment you realize you're no longer fighting for a cause, but for the face beside you. That's what Daniel understood before I did. He didn't see enemies. He saw people trapped in the same nightmare just on the other side of the line. That was his truth, and maybe that's why he was always calmer than me. He accepted the darkness before it swallowed him. At night, when the fighting stopped, we'd sit against the trench walls and talk in whispers. He'd stare at the stars, what little we could see through the smoke, and say if we ever make it home. Promise me we won't forget what it felt like to be afraid. I didn't understand it then, why he'd want to remember fear, but now I know. Fear is what keeps you human when everything else tries to turn you into something else. It's the thread that ties you to your conscience. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because that first day wasn't just the beginning of a mission, it was the start of a slow unraveling. The war didn't just take lives. It rewrote our sense of who we were, of what loyalty really meant. It showed me the truth hidden beneath all the noise, that promises made in the light are tested in the dark. And when that test came, I wasn't ready for what it would demand of me. If this part of the story made you feel the weight of that promise, write one word in the comments. Together. The order came at dawn. Cold light broke through the smoke, casting long shadows over the trenches. I remember the sound of the officer's voice, calm, almost detached, as he read the command. We were to advance past the ridge and secure a line deep within enemy territory. Everyone went silent. We all knew what that meant, That ridge was a graveyard waiting for new names. Daniel met my eyes, and in that single glance I knew he had already made his choice. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence said everything. He was going to lead the rear guard. I tried to stop him. I told him it was suicide, that someone else could take the position, that it wasn't his turn to play hero, but he wasn't listening. It's not about being a hero, he said, tightening the strap of his rifle. It's about keeping the others alive. That was Daniel, always protecting someone, even from themselves. He placed a hand on my shoulder and smiled the way he used to when we were kids, as if to say, "Trust me one last time." That smile has never left me. It's burned into my memory, replaying in the quiet moments like a cruel echo of what I couldn't stop. As we moved out, the air thickened. The sky turned the color of ash, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of distant explosions. Every step forward felt like walking into a heartbeat that was about to stop. The enemy waited somewhere beyond the fog, unseen but close enough to feel. I could hear the metallic rattle of their weapons, the low hum of engines preparing for destruction. My pulse was a drum inside my chest, and somewhere, behind me, Daniel's voice came through the radio, steady, controlled, unshaken. "Keep moving," he said. "Don't look back." But I did look back. I saw him standing there, half hidden by smoke, giving cover to the others as they advanced. He looked smaller in that moment, not like my brother, but like a shadow swallowed by the fire. Then the sky opened up. Mortar, machine guns, the kind of chaos that doesn't make sound so much as it devours it. I shouted into the radio, but all I heard was static. My throat burned from screaming his name, but no voice answered. The world dissolved into smoke and dirt and terror, and still I kept moving because that was the order. Because that's what he told me to do. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Because what happened next wasn't just the loss of a brother. It was the breaking point of everything I believed about courage, obedience, and fate. There's a truth that hides behind every battlefield. Not every sacrifice is noble, and not every survivor is lucky. Some of us live not because we were spared, but because the burden chose us. And that's when I realized survival isn't victory, it's punishment. If this part of the story made you feel the weight of that choice, write one word in the comments. Survivor. The radio cracked through the noise, a faint voice, barely cutting through the static. "I'm hit. I need help." For a moment, I froze. It was Daniel, my brother. The world around me dissolved into a blur of smoke and screams. I pressed the radio closer to my ear, shouting back, "Where are you? Talk to me." The only reply was another burst of static, then a sound I'll never forget, his breathing uneven and desperate. I could picture him, pinned down somewhere behind the ridge, surrounded, alone. My training screamed one thing, but my blood screamed another. I had to go back. I turned to move, but a hand grabbed my arm. My commanding officer. His voice was sharp, firm, unshakable. "That's an order, soldier. You stay with your unit." I remember the way he looked at me, not cruel, just empty, like he'd already made peace with the math of war. One life for many. But how do you measure something like that when the life in question is your brother's? My chest burned. My body was trembling. Could feel the pull of two worlds, duty and love, discipline and blood. "He's still alive," I said. "He's my brother." The officer didn't even blink. "Then pray for him." And that was it. That was the moment that split me in two. The sky opened again, this time with fury. Bombs rained down across the valley, lighting up the darkness like fire from heaven. Every explosion shook the ground beneath my feet. I could hear Daniel's voice through the radio, shouting something I couldn't make out. Then silence. I begged for a command to go back. I begged like a child. But the officer only repeated the same words. "We move forward." That's when I made the choice I'll carry until the end of my life. I took one step forward, just one, and I felt something inside me break. I knew what I was doing. I knew that every step I took away from him would become a ghost that followed me forever. Some part of me thought I could come back later, that maybe he'd hold on long enough. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was leaving him to die. That was the moment my heart turned into a battlefield of its own. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Because the hardest part wasn't the sound of the bombs, or the screams fading into silence. It was the realization that survival comes with a cost no one talks about. It's not courage that keeps you alive. It's the unbearable instinct to keep moving, even when every part of you is begging to turn back. That's the truth of war most people never see. The decisions made in seconds that take a lifetime to forgive. If this part of the story hits you in the same place it still hits me, write one word in the comments. Choice. I stayed. That's the truth. I've never been able to say out loud, not to anyone. I obeyed the order. I didn't turn back. I didn't save him. The radio went silent, but I can still hear his voice as clearly as if it's happening right now. It wasn't words anymore. It was a cry, raw, desperate, human. He died calling my name, and I couldn't answer. That sound has followed me ever since, echoing through every quiet moment of my life. It's strange how silence can be louder than any explosion. When the bomb stopped, when the world went still, it wasn't peace I heard, it was the absence of him. The next morning I found what was left of the ridge. Smoke still clung to the air like a ghost that refused to leave. I searched through the debris, through the twisted metal and mud, hoping for something, a sign, a miracle, anything. But all I found was his helmet, dented and scorched, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, and for the first time since the war began, I cried. Not the kind of tears that bring relief, but the kind that burn because they carry no forgiveness. I had done what I was told, and yet it felt like I had betrayed the only person who ever believed in me. That's the unforgivable truth about survival. Sometimes it feels like theft. I stole his chance to live, and in return I got to carry the memory of his death. People call it luck when you make it home. They call you brave, strong, disciplined. But bravery doesn't keep you warm at night. Discipline doesn't stop the nightmares. The truth is, survival without meaning is just another kind of dying, slower, quieter, but just as permanent. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because what I'm telling you isn't just about war. It's about the weight of silence and the lies we tell ourselves to keep moving. I told everyone he died instantly, that he didn't suffer, that it was quick, but that wasn't true. I lied because I couldn't face the truth, that I heard him until the very end, calling my name through the fire, believing I was coming back, and that lie became my armor. It protected me from the world but kept me trapped inside the moment I left him. Every medal, every handshake, you made it felt like a reminder of the one person who didn't. Sometimes I wonder if he forgave me in those final seconds, if he understood why I didn't come. Maybe he even knew that I couldn't. That's what keeps me awake. Not the memory of losing him, but the question of whether he died believing I abandoned him. And if he did, then maybe I did. If this part of the story made you feel the weight of that silence, write one word in the comments. Forgive. When the war finally ended, the silence felt heavier than the gunfire ever did. The world celebrated peace, but I couldn't feel it. I came home with my uniform, my medals, and the unbearable weight of a name I couldn't say without my voice breaking. People welcomed us as heroes, shaking my hand, thanking me for my service. So I smiled, nodded, said the right things, but inside I was still on that ridge, still hearing his last breath over the radio. The war didn't end for me. It just changed form. It moved from the battlefield into my mind. At night I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air as if I were still choking on smoke. I'd hear Daniel's voice calling out for me, echoing through the walls. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, but deep down I knew better. It wasn't a dream. It was memory refusing to die. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, standing between obedience and love, between orders and the only person who ever truly knew me. I'd reach for the radio, whisper his name, and for a split second, I'd almost believe he'd answer. I told myself for years that I did the right thing, that I followed command, that I saved lives by not going back. People like to say that doing your duty is the greatest form of honor, but what they never tell you is that sometimes duty kills the part of you that makes you human. I tried to live normally, to rebuild, to find meaning again. I worked, I laughed, I even learned how to hide the pain so well that most people never saw it. But grief has its own clock, and guilt. Guilt ages you faster than time ever could. I could see it in the mirror. Not just the wrinkles, but the emptiness behind my eyes. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Because what happens after the war isn't just survival. It's a transformation. A slow unraveling of everything you thought was true about yourself. I started writing letters I never sent, addressed to no one, just to fill the silence. I wrote them to Daniel, telling him things I couldn't say when he was alive. Each letter began the same way. Forgive me, brother, but forgiveness, I learned, is not something you can demand from the dead. It's something you have to earn, one sleepless night at a time. There were days when I'd walk through the city, surrounded by people who had no idea what it meant to live with a ghost. I envied them, their lightness, their ignorance, their peace. I wondered if they could see it in me, the shadow I carried. I didn't need a uniform anymore. The war had already marked me in ways no one could see, and sometimes, when I caught my reflection in a window, I almost saw him there, standing beside me, watching, silent, waiting for me to say what I never did. If you've ever carried something you can't let go of, something that refuses to fade, no matter how much time passes, write one word in the comments, memory. It took me decades to find the courage to pick up a pen again. My hands trembled as I touched the paper, as if even the weight of ink could betray me. For years I had written reports, signed documents, filled out forms, but never once did I write something that came from me. Not really, until that night. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same one where Daniel and I used to sit as kids, carving our initials into the wood. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of an old clock that seemed to echo louder with every second. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to say what I had been avoiding all my life. The first words were the hardest. Dear Daniel. They didn't look right on the page. Too clean, too small for everything I needed to say. I hesitated, my heart racing, the memories pressing against my chest like they were alive again. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could see him, standing by the door, wearing that same calm expression he always had, the one that said everything without words. It wasn't forgiveness I wanted, it was understanding. I wanted him to know that every day since that morning, I've lived trying to make sense of why I lived and he didn't. The words came slowly, uneven, like breaths between wounds. I told him everything, the orders, the hesitation, the sound of his voice breaking through the radio one last time. I told him how the world celebrated peace while I carried the war inside me. How I've looked for his face in every crowd, his voice in every silence. I told him about the letters I burned, the nights I drank myself into oblivion, the mornings I woke up and wished I hadn't. I told him how I became good at pretending, how I learned to smile, to talk, to exist, all while my heart stayed buried on that ridge with him. And at the end I wrote the words I never had the strength to say. I'm sorry for surviving. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because writing that letter wasn't about closure, it was about truth. The kind of truth that strips you bare and forces you to look at the parts of yourself you've kept hidden. I realized then that confession isn't about forgiveness, it's about release, about finally letting go of the story you've been telling yourself to survive. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was talking to a ghost. I felt like I was talking to my brother again, and maybe somewhere he heard me. When I finished, I didn't sign my name. I just folded the letter and placed it inside an old box with his dog tags. I didn't seal it. I wanted it to breathe, to exist, to wait, the same way I've been waiting for years for the silence to answer back. If you've ever written words you never meant anyone to read, write one word in the comments. Confession. I read the letter aloud that night, my voice breaking on every line. The words didn't feel like mine anymore. They felt borrowed, like they came from a part of me that had waited decades to speak. The house was dark, the only light coming from a flickering candle that threw long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled softly, and for a moment, I could almost hear the faint echo of distant gunfire, the ghosts of a past that refused to fade. Each sentence I read carried the weight of everything I'd buried, the sound of his last breath, the promise I broke, the life I took by surviving. As I read, it felt as though the years between us began to disappear. The air around me grew still, heavy, almost reverent, as if the world itself was listening. My voice trembled when I said his name. I hadn't spoken it out loud in years, not because I'd forgotten, but because every time I tried, it felt like reopening a wound that never healed. "Daniel," I whispered, and the name filled the room like a prayer and a curse all at once. I could almost see him then, standing just beyond the light, silent, waiting for me to finish. I confessed everything, not for redemption, but because silence had become too heavy to bear. I told him I never stopped hearing his voice, that every decision I made afterward was shadowed by the moment I didn't make the one that mattered most. I told him I didn't deserve forgiveness, and maybe I never would, but I needed him to know that I never stopped being his brother, even after I stopped being a soldier. My voice cracked when I reached the last line. "I'm sorry for surviving." The words hung there in the air, fragile and final, like smoke dissipating after a long fire. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because confession is not the same as peace. Saying the truth doesn't erase the past, it just makes you face it without the mask of denial. As the last words left my mouth, I realized I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Was I asking for forgiveness, or just an end to the noise inside my head? Maybe I wasn't searching for redemption at all. Maybe I just wanted permission to stop running from myself. The wind outside grew louder, rattling the windows as if the world itself had something to say. I sat there for a long time, the letter still open in front of me, the ink glistening under the candlelight. I waited for a sign, a sound, a flicker, something to tell me that he heard me, but all I got was silence. And somehow, that silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt understood. If this part of the story made you think about what forgiveness really means, write one word in the comments. Peace. The candle burned low as I folded the letter for the last time. The paper felt warm between my hands, like it had absorbed the weight of every word, every confession I had carried in silence for half a lifetime. The room was quiet now, no echoes, no voices, just the faint hum of the wind outside. For the first time, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a pause, a breath between what was and what might still be. Maybe this was what forgiveness truly looked like. Not absolution, but acceptance. The understanding that some wounds aren't meant to close, only to stop bleeding. I looked at the letter once more before tucking it away, whispering softly, "If you've ever carried a guilt that time couldn't erase, maybe you'll understand me." It wasn't just for Daniel anymore. It was for anyone who's ever lived with a shadow they couldn't escape, because guilt in the end is just love that's lost its way. And maybe sharing this story is the only way I'll ever set it free. If you felt something in these words, something you can't quite name, write one word in the comments. Understand. If you made it here, to the end of this story, then maybe something in it spoke to a part of you too. That quiet place we all try to hide, where memory and emotion live side by side. If it did, leave a comment saying I stayed until the end. I read every single one, and it means more than you think. Your voice here helps keep stories like this alive. When you like the video or subscribe, it tells me that these moments, these confessions, these glimpses into what it means to be human still matter, and that makes every word worth it. There's another story waiting for you right here on the side, one that dives even deeper into the truth we often avoid. Click and continue with me there. Let's see what else the silence still remembers.